Okay, Mead ground bar hardware. What I remember doing this report, and what I ended up doing was just kind of combining and making kind of a blank generic statement across the board here because there were so many issues with the ground bar hardware all over the place. Now, a lot of this may be stuff that is getting removed. Since we're taking all the 7/8 coax off the tower now, some of this may be coming down. Another thing with all of these videos that I'm doing on Mead, with a crew just leaving there, having just done an upgrade on the tower and added additional carriers, a whole lot of this landscape may have changed now too since we did this inspection about a year ago. So I don't know what the current status is, but uh, and if we find, I guess we'll kind of discuss that as we go forward here. But if the problem, well, it's time and material. I guess it doesn't matter. I was going to say if the problem is doubled, we may need to discuss that. But this whole repair of TIA repairs is on a time and material basis anyway. So, uh, and with that being said, another thing that is important in all of these discrepancies is tracking very precisely what is used and how many bolts, how many lock washers. I mean, every lug and things like heat shrink we probably won't worry about, but even that possibly every little thing. If we could record all materials across the board on everything that we do with explicit detail, that's going to help a bunch because AT&T is a real pain to generate an invoice for. The other thing, I guess, before I move into this is obviously as we do all of these repairs, lots of good photos of what it looks like now compared to what it did before when a final product. Okay, so ground bars. Every one of these ground bars, first of all, should have heat shrink over the barrel. I believe there's some, yeah, in this case, they just don't even have heat shrink. Now, again, I would guess that this is so crummy. I'm guessing this is probably some of the antennas that are coming down. Hopefully, but we may even want to look if there's an additional cable here at just relugging and starting all over again. Because now that heat shrink has not been put on the, chances are moisture has settled in here, and there is oxidization, and this is not making good contact right here. No, no, I don't. Why I don't have a cursor when I'm on the phone, but I mean, well, I'm on the recorder here, but um, so heat shrink should be over every lug. Now, in this case, and we see this a lot. I have no idea how this happens or why, but we're constantly seeing where someone has put the heat shrink on and then they never shrunk it. I don't know why, but we see this all over the place. Uh, so in those cases, like I said, we may want to even look at the possibility of cutting it back, putting a new lug on. Kind of use your judgment, I guess, looking down in there, see just uh, how much oxidization is down there. Um, Crimps. While I'm on that, crimps. There, I think if you zoomed in here on this, we find a lot of this where people don't even have a crimper on site, so they just take a pair of side cut pliers and they make some kind of a half-assed attempt to crimp that. It should be crimped at minimum of 2 times down that barrel. Sometimes you can actually get it 3 times, and it depends a lot on the crimper that you're using too as to how wide it is. But I think usually I go 3 times, 3 crimps down that thing. Two sometimes is sufficient. Pretty much everything we use is long barrels, and we shouldn't really have anything but a long barrel lug around in most cases, and that's what that is. That's a long barrel lug. A short barrel lug is going to be about half the distance of that barrel right there. And the reason for that is to get a good crimp and to utilize that entire barrel and get a good crimp between the. It all comes down to conductivity and getting the current into the earth ultimately. And anytime you're working with grounding, that is the goal, is for to make a nice flow and the easiest possible way for current to get from whatever you're grounding to the earth. Uh, NOx, that's another thing. Back to the NOx again. Once again, this is a dissimilar metal, tinned lug between a copper wire. There's going to be oxidization in there if there's any moisture in it all. So NOx should be going in that wire in down in that lug a little bit, so that that's full of NOx when we go to shove the wire in there and crimp it. Um, the okay, so heat shrink number one should be on every one of them. Not tape. If there's tape, it needs to be removed and replaced with heat shrink. Um, every place that there's a slotted hole should have a flat washer or a bond washer. I wish I had a picture of a bond washer. Actually, let me just go. Okay, this is a bond washer. It's just one rectangular washer. You can see one up here that is not installed on a ground lug already. And they come in very handy because the alternative, ooh, looky here. This is what you end up with a lot of times without a bond washer, is flat washers overlapping each other like this. Kind of depends on the size of the flat washers you got and the distance between your ground bar hardware, but typically they work very nicely in an application like this one, where you're wanting to get that on, and especially now in this case you'd probably be okay with a flat washer here on the head, and then on the opposite side using, but either way, anytime there is a slotted hole. Now in this case, the ground bar itself does not have slotted holes, so you wouldn't need anything on the back side anyway. Just the head is fine. But in a lot of ground bars, this will actually be a slotted hole, so they would be required both sides. Any place there's a slotted hole should have a flat washer. And that is, again, back to one of those AT&T specifications. Now here's a good example right here where they flat washers are overlapping each other. So all covered, all slotted holes covered. This is not a big deal, but it is nice for consistency's sake, as well as be able to easily inspect the hardware, to have the heads on the back side and the nuts on the front side. So if we were redoing this, we'd turn them around and flip them the other direction so that the nuts are coming the other way. And then the other critical one here is, as we're taking this stuff off and putting it back on, cleaning that surface good. And again, we see it over and over. So seldom does anyone do this. And it is so simple. If we're going to all the work of switching all this out and doing all this, to get a wire brush, a Dremel with a wire brush, or a grinding wheel, or just a hand wire brush, whatever it takes to get that shined up and get good bare metal and good shiny copper in this case, a good contact surface for good conductivity and NOx between that lug and the ground bar. So this discrepancy is going to entail going through every ground bar on the site. Now, this gets a little confusing at Mead there. When I say site, it is AT&T Mobility's equipment, not anybody else's equipment, and not. And when I guess when I say site, really it is the ground bars on the tower and the ground bars on the shelter, because it gets a little sticky on this particular site where it's AT&T Mobility, it's AT&T Landline, it's other people on the tower. But it's any of AT&T's equipment. We want to go through the lugs and get the heat shrink, the hardware, the connection shored up and correct at all ground bars.